The views and opinions expressed by participants in the following public affairs program do not necessarily reflect the position or beliefs of WDEF or its staff.
Since 1954, this is Point of View, the world record-holding public affairs program produced at the studios of WDEF-TV Chattanooga and with underwriting community support.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Point of View. I'm your host, Maurice Lewis. You know, most of us, we're anxious to see law enforcement, especially when we need them. But what do they do when we don't see them? Well, one of the things that they are tasked with is helping to prevent crime. Some months ago, we heard about something called the Crime Prevention Act and Crime Reduction Act, whatever you want to call it. There were naysayers out there who said, oh, this is just another public relations scheme. It will never work. It will never produce results. Well, guess what? Surprise, surprise, surprise. Something has actually happened. And John Mercer, you're joining us from the newsroom today to talk about this very important subject matter with the Chief of Police from Chattanooga, Tennessee. Chief Roddy, welcome to our show.
Thank you for having me.
Tell us what the milestone is and how did you get there?
We are at, I believe it's 65 days now without a homicide. And also the numbers that accompany that is we are looking at significant reductions in our group member related homicides and our group member related non-fatal shootings, aggravated assaults, which studies show that is one of the greatest indicators of the level of propensity for violence within a community. And we're showing double-digit drops in that, 40% drop in the non-fatal shootings attached to the group members in our community.
A cynical view might be, okay, shootings are down among that 1%. The gang members and what have you. Have they killed each other off and you've arrested all the rest of them?
As far as the reasons
I'm being
why,
cynical, not trying to be humorous.
No, I understand. It's understanding if you're going to tout something as we're achieving results, you need to be able to identify what accomplished that, or you're not quite sure what is achieving the goals that you are. And we believe it's a combination of everything that we've been working over the last couple of years to do. It's educate certain members of those segments to understand that there's a better way to do things, to stop committing violence in this community, that it's not tolerated. Another one is if you're going to commit violence, if you're going to drive the violence within the city of Chattanooga, then you get the full attention from law enforcement. And that's not only just us, but that's the collective partnerships that we've developed all the way up to the federal level.
John Mercer, you sit on the anchor desk and you report the stories day after day, 5 days a week, and now here you are having an opportunity to talk about this milestone.
Well, it's interesting because I think in a way, and I think you mentioned being cynical, and in the news media we try not to be cynical, obviously, but at the same time, when we hear or see on HC 911 another shooting, we're like, oh gosh, another shooting, but a lot of times they end up not being fatal. Now, I don't know what the good or bad of that is. We do see a lot of shootings in Chattanooga, but again, we're not seeing the fatalities, which is good news there. And I guess I would wonder, the violence reduction issue, you said it's a number of things. Is that one of the main issues you think that's been key in making these numbers go down?
Which part of that?
The actual murders.
The actual homicides themselves?
Homicides, yeah.
It's understanding that also the homicides are split out in several different areas. We have seen an increase in some of the type of homicide relative to whether it's drug involved or domestic violence. And that's another part of what we now need to focus our attention on with the Chattanooga Police Department, and more partnerships in that as well. As far as the number of homicides going down to the gang-related shootings, they correlate. If you're not shooting as many people, you're obviously, hopefully not going to kill as many people. So it's simply where both of the numbers are dropping relative to one another. If we had one that was dropping and one that was staying steady, then I think it would deserve a much closer scrutiny as to why one is moving and not the other. But we're seeing relative movement of both, which means the efforts that we're doing to either stop the violence, keep individuals that are committing the violence out of that cycle, whether it's through support systems and they find that there's just a better way to be in our community, or they are incarcerated by pulling the law enforcement levers that we do.
Well, that's part of the other thing. You had some help from the feds on this in terms of the type of charges that are being put on certain individuals that are repeaters, so to speak. So has that been helpful?
That and all of the law enforcement partnerships that we've had. We've had strong relationships that have only grown stronger through this partnership, through trying to address the gang-related violence, the group member-related violence. It's the state probation and parole. It's federal probation and parole. It's every single one of our federal law enforcement partners, state and local law enforcement through the Hamilton County Sheriff's Office and other jurisdictions around us, all working collaboratively to bring whatever lever we needed to pull on the individuals that were driving the violence, pull that lever and move some change towards the better, towards the numbers that we're seeing now.
What kind of feedback are you getting from your gang intelligence unit? Are the gang members talking among themselves, hey, listen, we got to switch up because this is serious time now, this is federal time, we're going to not do time here locally, we're going to be in Arizona or someplace like that?
They hear a little bit of that, but that's not really a topic of conversation that's going to come out in our intelligence streams. But I think that the propensity for what we've seen in violence is indicative of those individuals wanting to move away from that lifestyle to a degree.
Chief, we often hear this is a small percentage of people that are committing these crimes. Do you feel like it's when you officers get on the scene, they're seeing the same suspects over and over again on these shootings? Or
you are. It's like we've explained when we first started the Violence Reduction Initiative. 0.04% of the population of Chattanooga drives as much as 75 to 80% of its violence.
Wow,
it is the same names over and over again, and unfortunately, sometimes it's generational. We had an individual's name that came up in one of our intelligence reports the other day who was a junior. And when I was a midnight shift officer in East Chattanooga, I used to arrest the senior. So it is the systemic issues that not only Chattanooga experiences, but our nation faces as well. That's part of the cycle that we're working to change through not just making it law enforcement solution. It's getting into the schools, it's getting into the parenting model, it's getting into the support and mentoring and case management, mental health, substance abuse, all of the different mechanisms that breaks an individual's ability to make right and wrong decisions. And if their tendency is towards the wrong, then as a community, as a society, we need to work towards giving them more options and more support.
You know, we all have heard the police and donut jokes and police and coffee, but you guys actually do roll calls in coffee shops.
Yes.
You do roll calls at people's homes. Mm-hmm. How is that program working out?
We started what was called the Front Porch Lineup last November. And since its inception, I think we're touching on about 100 of those that we've conducted throughout the city since then. And we've held them at businesses, homes, major locations downtown, out in East Brainerd, malls, you name it, we will put them there. And it gets our officers in what we call a setting to where they can have a positive encounter. And we actually use it as a performance metric within the police department. The commanders in the police department are expected to report on how we deliberately go about communicating in a positive way, in a collaborative relationship manner with the people that we serve. And if it's something as simple as having a cup of coffee on someone's porch, right, it creates a positive conversation. It helps me understand your perspective and you mine. Or we go to a mall and we interact with a large number of individuals. We have a program called Coffee with a Cop, which was set up in conjunction with the AARP, where we meet on Saturday mornings and have coffee with that section of our community to hear their concerns. Or we do community and police interaction committees, which are the heads of every neighborhood association in the city meets once a month with our police leaders in the areas in which they live to go over their concerns. It's deliberate efforts to make the conversations happen, so we focus on what's important with the community and not just what we think is important to us.
And that has been one of the issues in the past. I know people have been afraid of obviously going to the police when there is a problem, but doing these kinds of events obviously gets you guys out there so you can say, hey, we're part of this community too.
Absolutely.
Well, you've also made a lot of changes in your command staff. I mean, you're still fairly new, and we're still looking to see, well, what else has he got up his sleeve? What else is he going to do? The goal is law enforcement, and you've put some key people in some key places to help you with that work.
Absolutely. Chief Tucker moved over as the Chief of Staff for the Police Department. He has 27 years experience with the Chattanooga Police Department. His ability to manage the staff and also understand what our past trends and past attempts to do good were, and now we might need to move the needle a different direction. Chief McPherson, who's over our investigative unit, which we are seeing remarkable clearance rates within our homicide unit right now.
You're smiling a little bit when you say clearance rates.
They are absolutely doing a phenomenal amount of job. If I use the word extremely tenacious, it would not begin to describe the dedication that those investigators and our crime scene investigators show on every single homicide that this community suffers so that they can support not only the victim but their families. We also created a new bureau, and Chief Dana Vaughn is taking over that, which is Department and Community Support Services, where she will not only lead up the community efforts, the ones that we spoke of a moment ago, where we create deliberate settings to create those conversations, but also work to manage what our workforce looks like. What are the health of our police officers? Through either peer support, critical incident stress debriefing, health and wellness, safety, injury on duty study. So if a police officer is healthy, and that is not just physical, but mental, spiritual, everything, they react better, they react safer, there's lower use of force reports, there's lower complaint on officers when you show a well-managed and healthy workforce. So it's meant to build the resiliency and protection of our own officers from within inside, which gives us a better workforce to protect our community.
That's great. That's good news there. Yeah.
Yes,
So I don't get in trouble. Assistant Chief Glenn Scruggs took over neighborhood policing. I want to make sure I get all my
Say
executive
all the
stuff in
names
there.
yeah.
we got that one
Yes,
right.
and Glenn is doing a phenomenal job managing everyone that pretty much wears this uniform on a daily basis.
Psychological screening is a very important part of the job because the stresses that you face, it might be in a patrol car for 7 hours and 52 minutes of nothing. And then in three or 4 seconds, boom, there it is. The stress level goes way up. You go home. The officer goes home. The stress level takes a while. Over time, how important is it to look at what stress does to an officer?
It's actually part of everything that, or not everything, but a good portion of what Chief Vaughn is going to be working towards. We're working on deliberate internal education mechanisms for our officers where there's programs that focus just on the health and wellness of an officer. I just recently had the opportunity to meet with some of the representatives from some of those programs at the International Association of Chiefs of Police Conference in Philadelphia 2 weeks ago, and got to hear how some of those programs have developed across the country in other departments. And it's making sure that we bring those mechanisms in, as well as the formation of development and peer support programs within the department that pays attention to just that.
I think what you guys both brought up is really important because I think a lot of times people forget that officers are seeing the community at their worst. I mean, at the worst time, because you don't call an officer to say, hey, I just got a new cat. You know, you don't call them for something like that. You call them when you're in an emergency or when someone has been hurt or injured. And it's, you know, and it's stressful for the officers too.
And we just actually had a department-wide vicarious trauma survey. We conducted it ourselves, and it gave all the members of the department the ability to express their concern over the department itself, but also the effect the job has on them or how it has on their coworkers. And we just received those results back. We are digging through those studies to see how we're going to use that to build and implement future programming within the department.
Some people may not realize it, but competition for police work is fierce. Every city wants good cops. Every city wants to have the best. You've had a program, the department has a program where there is like an incentive that's paid to individual citizens, like our viewing audience. If we know someone that would be a good candidate to be a Chattanooga police officer, upon successful completion of the academy, they get a reward.
Actually, it's the first day they sit in the academy.
Okay.
It's called Each One, Reach One.
So you mean it gets money even sooner?
Yes, absolutely. What it's designed is to encourage the entire community's recruitment of minority applicants for the Chattanooga Police Department. So if that applicant from a minority makes it all the way through the applicant selection process and begins the first day of the academy, the individual that helped recruit them into our department is eligible for a $500 reward.
You could see in the past where that might have presented some resentment among some members of the department. Here's another affirmative action thing. We have the test scores being lowered so that this person can come in. Is that true or not true?
Not the changing of standards. It's the absolute necessity of a police department to reflect the community that it serves. It's all designed about relationships and cross-communication about how we solve crimes. We don't just solve crimes with just cameras. We don't solve crimes with just fingerprints or just this piece of evidence, and not everyone confesses. It takes members of our community to tell us about what they are seeing, what they are experiencing, what they are suffering in their communities. That relationship is built by representing those that you serve and those that you protect.
John, you got a last quick question?
I just want to say welcome aboard, and we hope things go well, because for all of us, we want you to succeed.
You have to succeed because you know we like it here. Thank you very much for being on with us, Chief Roddy. And you will come back.
Absolutely.
All right, John, thank you very much.
No problem.
Well, listen, when we return, we'll be talking about loneliness. Is loneliness a number or a choice? We'll have that and more when Point of View continues.
You taught him how to hit a baseball, how to hit a receiver. You even taught him how to hit the open man. But how much time have you spent teaching him what not to hit?
Welcome to this segment of Point of View. I'm Amy, and this is my lovely co-host Jasmine. And with us today, we have Judy Herman and Troy Johnson. Now we're here to talk about loneliness, and tell us a little bit about how loneliness plays in the type of counseling that you guys do specifically.
Sure. You know, I see loneliness as one of the primary reasons that a lot of people seek out counseling. If I could sort of put a number on it, I would say probably 90% of the people that I see in my practice are there to work on some level of relational connections, improving some relationships, alleviating the sadness and the feelings that come along with being lonely. And I think it's also important to talk about the difference in being alone and being lonely. And I think most any of us at any point in our lives would say that we have been lonely.
Absolutely.
One of the things that we're seeing now is sort of a concern about chronic loneliness, loneliness that lasts for months or even years or longer for a lot of people. That kind of loneliness is something that I think we're just beginning to understand and just beginning to see show up in the clients that we work with.
And it's not just people living in the mountains by themselves, it's just everyday people, something everyone can experience, right? Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, Judy, tell us a little bit about how you deal with loneliness in your counseling.
Yes, I do work with individuals and couples, and then I also do group work. And group is awesome because it does break down, you know, it diffuses the loneliness that people feel. But there's many times where people come and say to me, "You're the only person that I've ever told this to," or "You're the only person that I can talk to."
Yeah.
And it's important to have other people to talk to, and that is a lot of times what brings them to counseling in the first place.
Absolutely.
So Troy, can you explain to me what your clients would describe as loneliness? What some people might be feeling loneliness and that they don't know what that is. Can you explain how other people would describe it?
Sure. I think in my experience and what I've heard people say, when they're really concerned about loneliness, it has to do with relationships. It has to do with feeling that they're not able to make the kinds of connections with other people that they would like to make. And then becoming concerned that there's something wrong with them, that there's a problem with them, that they're not able to, that their relationships don't last, that family relationships might be ruptured. And then there's a disconnect between them and the people who would normally be, or typically be, in their closest social network, people that they could rely on in a crisis. And when we feel as though we're alone in the world and there's no one that we could turn to in a moment of crisis or when we have a need, that's a deeper kind of loneliness, a deeper sense of loneliness that a lot of people experience.
Right. So Judy, when we had talked earlier, you explained to me, because obviously I didn't know, that loneliness is a symptom of a specific diagnosis. That's probably a part of something that's bigger. Can you explain some of those diseases or diagnoses that loneliness is a symptom of?
Yes, generally speaking, we're talking about depression, anxiety, mood disorders, we have phobias. There seems to be a common denominator in the problems that people present, and that is loneliness. And so that loneliness I see more as a feeling, and it's part of what depression is, and it's part of that negative thinking. So that's how it shows up.
Absolutely. Now, what would you say social media plays a role in loneliness? You know, people are so used to being able to connect with the touch of a button or virtually versus in person. What's your take on that, and how can people get better at actually connecting?
Yes, I think social media could be either good or bad when it comes to loneliness. So for example, I went to a conference recently and connected on a closed Facebook group with some people that I would later meet up with, and then we had that face-to-face, and it was kind of neat to have that, that introduction ahead of time through Facebook. What happens with social media, Twitter, LinkedIn, you know, Instagram, whatever it is you're on, it does do something to the brain. It gives you that dopamine high. Dopamine is the pleasure hormone in the brain that gets released. So if you're having problems in your marriage and you don't want to connect with your spouse, and you can go to Facebook or Twitter, and then you have this feeling of connection, but you're not connecting with the one that you're living with. So that's where it does, you know, contribute.
More temporary, right?
It gives you that feeling of connection, but it's actually an illusion of a connection. It's much more difficult to have a relationship with somebody face to face.
Yeah, so maybe use it more as a tool to meet people and set up face-to-face connections, interactions, instead of relying on it just being virtual or giving likes or, hey, I saw you went to, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
And let's not forget that social media also includes dating formats, Match.com, and ways that people look for friends or romantic relationships. And I have just sort of a little formula that I encourage my clients to use when they're dating or they're searching for that kind of a connection. If you meet online, use that format to get someone on the telephone. And use the telephone.
What's that?
Right.
People use that?
You move up the connection
People talk
quickly.
without buttons?
And,
Oh my goodness.
and then once you have someone on the telephone, that's for the purpose of setting a date, to meet for coffee, to meet for a drink, to go to visit a museum, and
Make sure they're
using social media to build that connection, to make a connection with someone, instead of using social media as a way to have a false sense of connection and lingering in an electronic experience with other people whose reality might be presented in a way that's a bit grandiose or maybe not realistic. And then what I see with a lot of young folks is sort of this perceived loneliness. Something my students today at UTC were talking about, FOMO, the fear of missing out.
Right, I've heard of that.
And so sort of this perceived sense of I'm not good enough to do that, or because I'm alone, or I don't have a partner, or I don't have a family, that I'm not able to do those things.
Absolutely.
And so lingering, I think, in social media without moving it onto a real connection can be problematic for people.
Absolutely. By the way, never have an argument with anybody by way of text. Like,
Yes.
that's really bad.
It is.
And a lot of people will text, and I encourage them, you need to get yourself a journal and start writing, because it's better to do that in a journal rather than, because you can create that loneliness. You're going to, get people mad and create that loneliness.
What about fighting with emojis? Is that okay?
I hope so.
Let's talk about the holidays are coming up.
Yes.
A lot of them are family-oriented or couple-oriented. What advice would you give to our viewers on how to cope with the perceived notion of loneliness during the holidays? Or what are some ideas or tips you could give to people?
The thing is, a lot of times it is more than perceived loneliness at this point. I've had clients tell me, I just wish that we could just skip Christmas and Thanksgiving. Let's just skip it, and I'll be okay.
Yeah.
But there are so many expectations, aren't there, when it comes to blended families and
holiday parties,
right?
And
even me, like I've got 4 kids, and they're all adults, and I'm having to give up my Thanksgiving, and so I may have some loneliness, but we're going to celebrate the day after.
Yeah.
So those kind of things, but those are real, and I think we need to deal with that. But if you do find yourself alone, I highly recommend volunteering somewhere, getting out and getting with a community of people, so you can get the focus off of yourself and your loneliness and give. I think giving to others is a huge way to deal with loneliness.
And isolation is sort of a precursor to loneliness for a lot of people. If you were to look up a definition of loneliness, it would talk about social isolation or a disconnect from the group. And I think that's great advice. If you find yourself being alone more often than you would like and not interacting with people, find a way to do that that's comfortable for you, that's safe for you. Reaching out to a counselor or a therapist to talk about ways that you can alleviate the loneliness, what barriers are standing in the way for you to re-engage in your group, in your social group.
So I know you talked earlier about dopamine and the health effects of people using technology and trying to get rid of that loneliness feeling. What are some of the health effects of being lonely? How can it affect your health in the long term? What do you think, Judy?
Well, it definitely does affect us, because our brains are wired for connection. Even as the 4 of us are sitting here talking, and we're asking questions and we're listening to each other, each one of our brains are being affected by the other. This is a group right here. And it would be so much different than if one of us were talking to the camera. We're going to have a different energy, we're going to have a different experience. So that's so important to realize that our brains and our whole beings and how we are wired for connection. And isolation, I know a lot of people will get into that rut, and maybe they've had some experiences of being betrayed by friends or learning how not to trust people. It's so important to get beyond that and allow yourself to open up, because friendships and relationships, they're a risk.
Yeah.
You're vulnerable, and it's so good to be open and be willing to know what your blind spots are, because that's how we learn and how we grow. We have also, as far as the brain goes, there's mirror neurons in our brains. So like if if you smile at me, Amy, I'm going to smile back at you because of our mirror neurons. We will imitate
Life is best
each
shared
other.
with others, right?
That's right.
So try to remember that. Well, we only have a few more minutes. Can you tell the viewers how they can get a hold of you if they're interested in maybe seeking out an appointment, or any resources they can get from your websites?
You can reach me, judycounselor.com.
Okay.
And
That's
I
pretty
write,
easy.
judycounselor.com. My name is Judy, and I'm a counselor. I'm a licensed professional counselor, and I specialize in relationships. And I do write blogs. I've got a book you can download it for free. It's called Relationship Dignity Manifesto, but it's about how to get clear on your relationships. And it's a short ebook, and so I'd love for you to download it, and there's some other free resources. So I'm writing on a regular basis, and also I'm on Facebook, and that's Judy Counselor with a number 1 next to the Facebook if you want to join me there and like the page.
Troy, how can they reach you?
People can find me by calling 423-355-7161. My practice is In Focus Counseling. I work a lot with individuals and couples, and a lot with members of the LGBT community who seem to be experiencing loneliness maybe at an even higher rate than non-LGBT people.
Great. All right, well, that's all the time we have today. Thank you. Next week's Point of View will be honoring a special guest as we honor our nation's veterans on the next Point of View.
Closed captioning provided by the following.
Funding for this program is brought to you by Barnett & Company, specializing in tax-efficient strategies for the preservation and distribution of family wealth, offering continuous investment management with a focus on long-term strategies. Areas of service include investment, estate, education, and retirement planning. Barnett & Company, the power of compound returns over time. More information can be found on the web at barnettandcompany.com.